Hello, I'm Chandrika Joshi, and I'm going to tell you a story called Samudra Manthan, the churning of the ocean. When that wise old soul, Paramatma, decided to create the universe, they became three gods. Brahma, the god of creation with red skin and four heads. Vishnu, the god of preservation with blue skin and four arms. And Shiva, the god of destruction with blue skin, four arms, three eyes. And it is Shiva who wears a garland of a snake called Vasuki around his neck. Brahma went to work straight away and created the three worlds, heaven, earth, and underworld, Patal. And then Brahma created two types of beings, Devas and Danavas. The Devas were 33 in number and were luminous. And they included the sun, the moon, the planets, earth, water, fire, wind. And he placed them in heaven. The Danavas were not luminous, bar one, and his name was Swarabhanu. The Danavas were placed in the underworld. Soon there was a power struggle. The Danavas took over heaven and kicked the Devas out. Brahma was worried. But it was Vishnu who was even more worried. For Vishnu knew that he would find it difficult to preserve the universe if the cosmic order wasn't in place. So he had a plan. He invited the Devas for a meeting. And there he told them, right in the heart of the universe, in the Milky Ocean, there is a pot of Amrita, the elixir of immortality. If you can get hold of it and drink it, you would become immortal, and hence you would stay permanently in heaven. Indra, the king of the Devas, came forward and asked, how do we get hold of that pot of elixir? You would have to churn the ocean, said Vishnu. Just like when we churn milk to get butter, in the same way, you will have to churn the ocean. For that, we need a churning rod, said Indra. Use Mount Mandara. Use the mountain as the churning rod, said Vishnu. What about a rope? Said Indra. Vishnu looked at Shiva and said, how about Vasuki, Shiva's snake? Can use him as a rope. Vasuki at that stage was resting his head on Shiva's shoulder. And he lifted one of his eyes and said, thank you, but no thank you. I don't want to be your rope. The Devas begged Vasuki, Vasuki, please do it for us. Eventually, Vasuki agreed. Then Vishnu said, you can't churn the ocean alone. The ocean can only be churned by two types of people, the divine ones, which is you, and the ones who are not so good, the evil ones, which are the Danavas. Leave it to me, said Indra. So Indra went to heaven, where the king of the Danavas now lived, and convinced him to allow the Danavas to help churn the ocean. The king Bali, who was the king of the Danavas, agreed, provided they got to share the nectar of immortality, Amrita. On an auspicious day, they gathered around the Milky Ocean, which was in the heart of the universe. They dragged Mount Mandara, but did not know where to put him. And then Vishnu said, the ocean doesn't have a base. I will provide you with a base. And Vishnu closed his eyes and folded his hands. And from Vishnu's being emerged a large turtle, blue in color, just like Vishnu. And the turtle dived into the ocean and took his place, and they placed Mount Mandara on his back. Vasuki came and coiled himself around the mountain with his head pointing in one direction, his tail on the other. Vishnu instructed the Devas to grab the head end and the Danavas to grab the tail end. We're not going to grab Vasuki's bottom, the Danavas objected. Hence, they had to swap over. When Vishnu gave the orders, the Devas pulled the tail and the Danavas pulled the head, and the mountain moved. And it turned this way and that way, this way and that way. And whoosh, 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 the ocean churned. Just then, Vasuki coughed. Venom came out of Vasuki's mouth and covered the Danavas' faces, which became disfigured. Vasuki, look what you've done to us, they shouted. You're holding me too tight, Vasuki said. Don't hold me so tight. Once everyone had calmed down, they went back to churning the ocean. The Devas pulled the tail, the Danavas pulled the head, and the mountain moved. And it turned this way and that way, this way and that way. And whoosh, 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 the ocean churned. And then they churned it for a night and a day, until the ocean started bubbling. Then they stopped, waited, watched. Out of the ocean emerged a blue liquid. Initially, they were in awe. They even wondered if that was the nectar. But soon that liquid had fumes which started burning their eyes and their skin. And then Vishnu shouted, that is halahal. That is the poison which will destroy the whole creation. You must beg Shiva to destroy it. So they went to Shiva, folded hands, and begged Shiva to do something about the poison. Shiva smiled and then opened his mouth wide and swallowed the poison and rested the poison in his throat, and his throat went blue. And hence Shiva is called Nilakantha, the blue-throated one. They thanked Shiva and went back to churning the ocean. The Devas pulled the tail, the Danavas pulled the head, and the mountain moved this way and that way, this way and that way. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The ocean churned. They churned the ocean for night and a day until it started bubbling. When they stopped, they waited, they watched. Out of the ocean emerged the silver-skinned moon god, Chandrama. The Devas and the Danavas lifted Chandrama, took him to Shiva as a gift. And Shiva picked him up like a jewel. He placed it in his jata, his hair. They went back to churning the ocean. So the Devas pulled the tail, the Danavas pulled the head, and the mountain moved. It turned this way and that way, this way and that way. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The ocean churned. They churned it for a night and a day until it started bubbling. And they stopped, waited, watched. And out of the ocean emerged the great elephant Airavat with 7 trunks, white in color. And Indra, the god of the Devas, took him. Then came out a horse with 7 heads, white in color, wings, a horse which could fly. And the king of the Danavas, Bali, took him. And then came out Surabhi, the cow, the wish-granting cow. Vishnu kept her on the side. And at a later stage, she was to be given to the sages, the wise ones, the ones who were not greedy. When the ocean became still, they went back to churning it. The Devas pulled the tail, the Danavas pulled the head, and the mountain moved. And it turned this way and that way, this way and that way. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The ocean churned. And they churned it for a night and a day until the ocean started bubbling. Then they stopped, they waited, they watched. And from the ocean emerged Kalpavriksha, the wish-granting tree. And then came out Panchajanya, the large conch. And Vishnu took it and blew it. Woo! That was the first musical instrument. That wasn't it. Then came out the magical bow, Sharanga. The bow, when you fire 1 arrow, the arrows multiply. That was put to the side. And the ocean became still. So they went back to churning the ocean. The Devas pulled the tail, the Danavas pulled the head, and the mountain moved. And it turned this way and that way, this way and that way. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The ocean churned. And they churned it for night and a day until it started bubbling. And out of the ocean emerged the goddess of misfortune. Even though no one wanted her, the whole universe was covered with misfortune. But then emerged the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi. Lakshmi dressed in pink silk, holding a garland in her hands, a garland made out of pink, never fading lotus blooms. And she glided and went to Vishnu, and she put the garland around his neck and said, "You will need me by your side if the universe is going to prosper." Vishnu accepted Lakshmi as his wife. Then the ocean was still, so they went back to churning it. The Devas pulled the tail, the Danavas pulled the head, and the mountain moved. And it turned this way and that way, this way and that way. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The ocean churned. And they churned it for a night and a day until it started bubbling. They stopped, they waited, they watched. And from the ocean emerged the god Dhanvantri, the god of well-being and health and medicine. And in his hand was the pot of Amrit, the elixir of immortality. The Devas dropped the tail, the Danavas dropped the head, and they rushed to grab that pot. It was Svarabhanu, the luminous Danava, who was the first one to reach Dhanvantri, he grabbed the pot and they made a run for it. Everyone ran after him. Vishnu shook his head, closed his eyes, folded his hands, and from his being emerged Mohini, the enchantress, the goddess of enchantment. She was blue in color, dressed in yellow, and she took long strides and floated towards the Devas and the Danavas who were running. And soon she caught up with them. And the minute they set their eyes on her, they were mesmerized. They stopped running. They couldn't take their eyes off her. The eyes were glazed. She went to Swarabhanu and gave her hands, and Swarabhanu placed the pot in her hand. And then Mohini said, "Allow me to serve you Amrita, the nectar of immortality. You have worked so hard to attain it." So the Danavas made a line and sat on her left, and the Devas made a line and sat on her right. They were all enchanted by her Maya, her illusion. And she lifted the Maya off the Devas, and they recognized her straight away. She was no other than Vishnu. But the Danavas were still enchanted. So Mohini started playing with the pot. And then she gave a drop to the Devas. And when she went to the Danavas, she did not give any nectar to them. It is only because of the enchantment they thought that they were drinking the nectar. The Devas became more luminous, bigger, and stronger. But one person, one being broke through that enchantment, and that was Swarabhanu, the luminous Danava. Swarabhanu could see something was not right. He could see that the Devas who were having the nectar were brighter and stronger, and he could see around him the Danavas, even though they seemed to have had the nectar, were the same. Something was not right. So Swarabhanu jumped to his feet and sneaked behind Mohini and took his place in the line of the Devas. It was the sun god and the moon god who tried to attract Mohini's attention, to tell her that Swarabhanu had joined their line. But Mohini didn't notice. And she offered the nectar to Swarabhanu, and he took it and he swallowed it. Then Vishnu noticed. As Swarabhanu became stronger, brighter, bigger, Vishnu noticed that he was a Danava. So Vishnu lifted his right hand, and in his hand appeared Sudarshan Chakra, the discus of time, with his 108 serrated edges. And he turned it and threw it towards Swarabhanu. The discus came rushing and decapitated Swarabhanu. His head fell on one side, his body shrunk into a tail and shot on the other side. When Mohini had finished distributing Amrita, she disappeared. This is when the spell was broken and the Danavas woke up. and they could see what had happened, that they had been cheated. They had to vacate the heaven. Brahma put all the Devas back in heaven. Vishnu was so pleased that the sun will now keep on shining. The wind will keep on blowing, the water will keep on flowing, the earth will keep on turning. The fire will keep on burning, for they are the Devas, and Devas had become immortal. But then Brahma had to find space for Swarabhanu, because Swarabhanu had become two beings, a head and a tail. In fact, Swarabhanu had become two beings. The head became Rahu and the tail became Ketu. And Brahma found a space for them and put them miles apart from each other in opposite directions. They were immortal and they were vengeful. So Rahu and Ketu hated the sun god and the moon god. And they still hate the sun god and the moon god. So every time the sun comes close to Rahu, Rahu tries to swallow the sun, and we get a solar eclipse. But he can't keep the sun for too long, for he is only a head, and the sun escapes and goes back to doing what the sun does. And Ketu, the tail, tries to devour the moon god, and we get a lunar eclipse. But again, Ketu also cannot keep the moon trapped within him. The moon escapes. He is immortal. Brahma accepted this little anomaly and thought of creating a third type of being, Manavas, mankind, humans. Brahma decided to make the humans partly divine, partly demonic, partly like the Devas and partly like the Danavas. And he placed them on earth. But they would die because they are mortal, they are not immortal. In fact, even the Danavas, who were now not immortal, live amongst the humans, the Manavas, on earth. They are the ones who are power hungry, who are cruel, who want to drink the ocean and destroy the earth and destroy the galaxy and everything there is. We all know who they are. Luckily, they are not immortal. Thank you very much.